Hello, everybody. As folks join, I am going to ask you to let us know where you're calling from, where you're joining us from, just as a kind of a warm-up question. It's always interesting to know um, who's joining us live on these webinars. Obviously, we have a lot of folks around the world who watch the recordings. So yeah, welcome and yeah, share a little bit about yourselves, and we will get started in a minute once we've let as many folks in as come uh, by in the next couple of minutes. Oh, thank you, Maine. I would imagine it's pretty chilly up there. It's pretty chilly here in New York. Oh, I'm in New York, by the way. Rachel, would you like to share where you are?
Yeah, I'm in Washington, D.C. Nice to see everybody.
Yeah, cool.
It is really chilly. It's like quite the cold snap that the East Coast is experiencing.
It's true. I know. It's true. Janelle, who organized this webinar for our team, has just been in Minnesota where was it minus 10? Am I? And that's F. Not,
Wow. There you go.
yeah, no. Okay, Florida, you're just
From
showing off.
Florida.
We're not even having that conversation. Okay, yeah, we'll just give it a few more minutes. But yeah, so we're going to have a chat. Uh, and we really encourage all of you to share as well. And so we'll keep prompting you to share your insights. This is a conversation that Rachel and I usually have behind closed doors where we discuss kind of like, what did we see this year? What are we expecting for next year, judging from all the conversations we've had? Rachel and I have known each other for more than a decade at this point. We actually started working together when ULI launched its initiative, Building Healthy Places. What is this? What does this mean for real estate? What is this health thing that we're being asked to consider? Um, and so we started working together. It's probably 11 years ago, right? Because Building Healthy Places was published 10 years ago. So at least 11, if not 12 years ago.
Yeah.
And we've really seen
ULI
it.
launched Building Healthy Places in 2013.
Yeah. Okay, great. Yeah. So
Yeah.
it's a long time. It's going to be a recurring theme, kind of, this shift that we've seen over this amount of time. But Rachel, yeah, go ahead and introduce yourself to
Yeah,
everybody.
yeah, nice to be here. Nice to be here with everybody. So I'm Rachel McCleary. I'm in leadership at the Urban Land Institute. I help lead the ULI Randall Lewis Center for Sustainability and Real Estate, which is our think, do, tank on sustainability, which we really define in a very broad way. So that encompasses decarbonization, resilience, health, and social and racial equity. And for folks that aren't familiar with the Urban Land Institute or ULI, we're a global real estate industry group. We have members that are spread across the world, and we have a mission to shape the future of the built environment for transformative impact worldwide. So I worked on health and real estate at ULI for a long time, as Joanna said. I have a background in transportation planning and have been delighted to partner with the Center for Active Design generally and with Joanna specifically through the years on healthy places stuff.
Great. Yeah, thank you. And for me, it's Joanna Frank. I'm the CEO of the two entities that run Fitwel. And my background was as a real estate developer. So I came to real estate much earlier in my career than health and the built environment. And actually had worked with ULI and knew of ULI from a real estate context. I really kind of respected the guidance that ULI gives the industry, very credible and something that, I feel like really does shape the narrative that real estate is focusing on in a given year or period of time. And so when we started the Center for Active Design immediately after the Active Design Guidelines were launched in New York City, and we'll talk more about that, but it was 15 years ago. ULI actually came to us and asked if we'd be able to help them write a set of guidelines specifically for real estate developers because the active design guidelines were published by New York City and really were a guide for cities or communities that had public space. And they really didn't answer the question for real estate of like, what is within our purview, how can we really promote health and well-being with what we can control? So it was very exciting for us. We wondered at the time why ULI had hired us because we didn't have a track record as a nonprofit, but we do really appreciate it. So thank you. It was a good way to start for the nonprofit. Um,
Uh, Well, I can answer that. I mean, I feel like you guys had the really deep, like, research chops, and we really needed that. We needed to bring the evidence base into thinking about what is the guidance that we can offer for real estate leaders. Yeah, so we celebrated 10 years of the Building Healthy Places toolkit, and I think we'll drop a link in the chat to the toolkit. So it was definitely a bright spot of this year. I think we celebrated that together in Denver as part of ULI's spring meeting. And it was a good milestone. It was a good opportunity to sort of look back and like reflect on where the field has come. As you said, like at the time, there wasn't a ton of actionable guidance for health and specifically for real estate development. And specifically on health. And now it feels like there's just a lot more that's out there. There's Fitwel, there's new standards like mode score focused on transportation, legacy standards like LEED that are increasingly focused on health. So it's been a good decade when it comes to, thinking about how do we understand the impact that the built environment and buildings has on health outcomes. And obviously there's still so much work that we need to do as a field to take action on that knowledge. But yeah, we've come a long way.
Yeah. And it was very good to have that moment in the spring to really celebrate how much progress had happened in the last 10 years, because I do think you don't feel it when it happens over a decade. And we all live in a shorter time phase, basically, or time frame. And especially, I think in the spring of this year, we will discuss 2025 now, why it was very good to take a moment and be like, no, actually, we have made a lot of progress as an industry around health, well-being, and really prioritizing people in the built environment. And that when we take that longer view, we can see that progress, even if in the short term, we don't always necessarily feel like we're making positive steps. So that was my transition into, so let's discuss
Year.
2025. Yes,
Yeah, I know.
so
It's been
yeah, tell me kind of if you were to summarize 2025 in like 5 years' time, like what would be the highlights of 25? How would we sum it up with a little perspective perhaps, or not? How are you feeling about
yeah,
2025?
I mean, I think, when I look back at this year, I just see it as definitely one with like a lot of shifts and challenges in real estate. I think someone on my team said it's been a doozy. It's been a really, and I think in the spring, we were still trying to like find our way, right? I think a lot of that was related to, there's a very shifting federal policy context. It was sort of hard to make sense of everything. I think that people needed a beat to kind of like figure out what it all meant. And I see, lots of evidence that the work is continuing and that everybody's continuing to push forward. Um, I think, think about the sort of big picture. I think that when it comes to public health more generally, it's been a really tough year. One professor that I think really highly of said that, when she looks back at her career, this has been the most difficult year for public health as a field, in her experience. And so, I think that it relates to sort of the undermining of public health science, the public health workforce, during the shutdown, the sort of withdrawal of SNAP. So I think we can celebrate sort of like the good stuff and lift up all of the work, the hard work that continues, and also just really acknowledge that for a lot of folks, it's been really challenging, especially here in DC. I mean, I'm based in DC, and just there's just been a lot of economic impacts and a lot of difficult things that people are grappling with in this moment. So I'm hopeful that 2026 will bring more stability and more clarity. And also, grateful to ULI members and to, folks that are really doing the work on the ground, that everybody is still committed and still plowing forward.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think it's interesting when we look at 2025 in the broader context. Um, at the beginning of the year, I think it was a kind of everyday. The ground was shifting very quickly. Obviously, both of you and I do a lot around ESG. We'd really been focusing on ESG reporting for the last 5 years. The industry as a whole, the real estate industry had been focusing on ESG reporting as a primary kind of metric by which to kind of assess how to optimize real estate for value. And then obviously, certainly here in the US, both of us work globally, but here in the US, that deprioritization of ESG, that questioning of ESG, is this really core business for real estate? How do we demonstrate that these priorities around addressing physical risk of climate change or responding to health for the people that we're building for, is that core business for real estate? And so I think that those questions were being asked at the beginning of the year. And I am pleased to say that even now, which is a relatively short amount of time, that we are now seeing real estate really kind of get its feet back under it and make an affirmative decision about whether, yes, we see this as core business for our company, or actually this isn't core business, and we were doing it because we had to, but this isn't something we prioritize. So I think at least the clarity and the affirmation or the reaffirming of what is and what isn't core business is not a bad thing. I don't mind the need for that discipline. I think it's okay for us to really be able to say, is this adding value to real estate? Is this actually measurably impacting health for the occupants? And if so, how do we substantiate that? How do we really add rigor to the way that we're measuring and making decisions so that this is no longer seen as a nice to have, but that we really can establish what we're talking about here, which is, prioritizing health for people, prioritizing communities, understanding that connection between how our built environment directly and measurably impacts the quality of life of the people we build for. You know, to me, it is very obviously core business, but that is not good enough. We have to be able to demonstrate to the industry that this is core business. So I do think that this has been a reassessment of the direction, certainly that we're going in, as far as how do we talk about this? How do we demonstrate that the work that we're doing is a fundamental piece of the industry? And yeah, go ahead.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, while we're sort of like
Yeah.
reflecting a little bit, I would love to see if folks in the chat have any reflections of their own about 2025, and what you've been seeing. Yeah, I think like when we were prepping to start, I think you do see in this moment this real need, and not necessarily a shift, but a real focus on performance and really making sure that we're measuring what matters and that we're focused on outcomes, and that that I think there is a bit of fatigue around, especially around sustainability, a lot of the sustainability reporting frameworks. And so people really want to make sure that they're putting scarce resources into what matters. And so less of a focus of sort of performative reporting and more on performance and making sure that what we're investing in and what we're doing is actually moving the needle and driving down energy costs, increasing value, improving performance. And I think, we've seen a lot of energy price volatility and rising costs on the energy side. And so that just really makes it all the more imperative that real estate is really continuing to invest in efficiency and renewables. And the same is true about health, with health being a competitive advantage in competitive markets.
Yeah.
I guess the other piece I should pull in just is, to focus on resilience and risk. And that's another piece that I think real estate leaders are really focused on.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that it's those scarce resources that are
Mm,
really necessitating the discipline, because you have to do more with less. The teams that certainly that we work with, many of them are smaller than they were last year or in prior years. So the people being asked to do all the reporting, to do, kind of this work are smaller, or they're being asked to do more if they're the same size. So it is imperative that they are super efficient with their time, and that's on us, right? How do we, as a certification body or any of the certification
Mhm.
organizations, how do we reduce the amount of paperwork? How do we reduce the amount of busy work that we're asking, or repetitive tasks that we're asking people to do? Because what is important isn't the reporting, it's the acting on the reporting. How do we
Yeah.
get to that action phase? If we're
Mhm.
spending all our time pulling the paperwork together, that is not benefiting folks. You need to understand, obviously, the baseline. We need to understand existing conditions, but really to drive the future state of assets, to drive the future state, but and not the work isn't in putting all of that information together, right? The work is in actually acting on that information. So I do think that that scarcity really does focus the mind on what is important, what is essential, and that is okay actually, because I would say that health is essential. And one of the things, the other thing that we've seen in 2025 is that the competitive edge piece that you just talked about with health and wellness. So, yes, we've seen a reduction in demand for ESG or metrics from investors. Certainly here in the US, this is not what we're seeing globally, and we can talk about that in a second. But at the same time, we have seen a very dramatic increase in consumer demand. And consumers are now really saying, I am going to go back to an office if you can demonstrate that it is going to support the quality of life, my health and well-being, more than me staying at home. We are seeing on the residential side that people purchasing and renting properties are really asking for features of health and wellness, air quality, access to nature, access to outdoor space, are all in the kind of top three, top five most requested features of residential real estate. And that again that's a global trend we're seeing. So that's really shifting the market into a consumer-driven demand for health and wellness from what was prior like an investor-driven demand. So that changes the landscape a lot. It changes how we talk about health and wellness. It changes the metrics. And then it also brings on the need to really guard against what we're calling health washing, but that kind of everybody's jumping on the health and well-being bandwagon and saying, my building's healthy, which again, a little self-serving perhaps to say this, but it really does increase the need for certification, because how do you demonstrate that you are doing things to an evidence-based standard, that you are doing things
Yeah.
that have actually been certified, verified, and are making a measurable difference rather than just making claims about it. So that's a big change that we've seen this year. So
Nobody's told us what they're seeing or what they were experiencing in 2025 yet.
I know, I'm sure you have
Yeah,
lots that you would like to
yeah,
share
we'd
with
love to see. Well, yeah.
us. Yeah, so other things in 25 before we get onto kind of what we're seeing for the future. Rachel, do you want to talk about kind of
Yeah,
what the
yeah,
Lewis
yeah.
Center
I mean,
is
I think
doing?
we talked about, so I mean, obviously, I think it has been and will probably continue to be a pretty challenging macroeconomic environment for real estate right now. The ULI Emerging Trends Report, which is sort of our flagship publication on, real estate and capital markets, has compared it to a sort of fog that has been really obscuring the path forward for real estate. And so those macroeconomic conditions are things like the high interest rate environment that we've seen, a constrained labor supply, increasing and volatile materials costs, in part because of tariffs, and all of that is making it hard for deals to pencil. It's creating a lot of uncertainty. I think the energy piece of the puzzle is also making things unpredictable. The rise of AI and data centers has also been a big factor. So all of that, really, I think adds up to a lot of crosswinds for real estate. And I think that plays out in the certification space too, because if you're making choices about what you can spend money. Maybe you're still trying to do all of those things, but making a decision about whether or not actually getting the certification is going to be worthwhile to you. It's a choice that real estate leaders have to make. I think at the same time as all that is happening, there's still a lot of development momentum. I mean, I think it's no question that the country needs a lot more housing. We need places for people to live in the places where they want to live. So, more infill, transit oriented, walkable, lots of different kinds of housing that meets the needs of people at a variety of different price points and a variety of different like family situations. So there's like, I think I read that there's 20 million units or something short. So there's just a lot of pent up demand for new housing and obviously deep need, and that scarcity is driving the housing price acceleration that we've seen at least over, recent years. I think it's sort of TBD what happens with those trends given where things are now. So I think, the work of developers are continue. And I was chatting with a member at our fall meeting, and I was talking to a developer in Houston, and he's actually somebody who's using the BHP toolkit that we talked about earlier as the blueprint for his project, which is pretty incredible. But he said that even given everything that's going on, he's optimistic about the future and he is plowing ahead with his big mixed use. It's got retail and office and housing, a development project, which is going to be optimized for health. So I think, maybe that's just real estate developers have to be sort of optimistic by nature. Because if you had doubts, this would be a really challenging business to be in. But I also think that people, there's this sort of immediate conditions that we're all in, and then there's the future and the need in the future, and that need in the future will continue to be one where people want, housing and communities that are optimized for their health and places to work that are good for them and that help their productivity and that help them connect and help them stay active and are beautiful and are equitable and help them connect with folks across difference. And so I think that momentum is strong and will continue.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, talking about that kind of consumer-driven demand is the reason I think that this movement has resilience because if people are demanding it, then developers will provide it, right? That is the job of successful real estate developers are keenly aware of what their target markets are demanding, what their customers are demanding. We're seeing on the office side this continued race towards quality, and one of the kind of demarcations of quality is really the health and well-being aspects of your indoor air quality within that office space, your access to daylight within that office space, all of the facets of the indoor environment, how you're supporting social interaction of your teams. All of these things are the conditions that individual employees are demanding of their employer, and so that employer in turn as the tenant is demanding it of their landlords.
Yeah. And they
And so
have all this information that's available. I mean, I think when we did the toolkit, wearables and, technology and the sort of individualized information that you can get about your environment, about your steps, about, everything that's going on, like that didn't exist 10 years ago. And so, or maybe it did, but it was not nearly as prevalent.
yeah.
I don't think I had like a smartwatch or a Fitbit back then. And so I think that's a big change. And I think there'll be more and more integration of buildings, phones, and wearable tech that are, helping people understand the impact of the environment on their health outcomes and then optimize their health within those spaces.
Yeah, totally. I mean, we see air quality continuing to be this kind of canary, which I know is
Uh-huh.
the image that a recent study used, but it is the kind of like it is the leading indicator, I would say, of quality of people really asking about indoor air quality now in a way that did not happen before COVID. So that's one of these really big shifts we've seen. And then to your point about everybody now has this data on their wrists, on their phones, that I know even 5 years ago we were talking to real estate developers about indoor air quality right after COVID or, just during COVID. And there was always a concern about the risk of having the measurements of air quality, because if you have poor air quality, obviously there's a concern about like, how do I adjust this? What do I do to actually
Yeah.
address the
What
air
do you do
quality?
about it? Yeah.
Right, and that's a risk to us as the building owner. And I think 5 years ago, that information was in the hands of the building owners only, um, because they were the ones with the sensors, they were the ones with the smart building systems. But that has now shifted, and I don't think that you can, as a building owner, say, well, we are the holders of this information. Now, every individual in that building has the potential to have an indoor air quality measure on them, and certainly companies have the devices necessary in order to measure the air quality of their spaces. And so I think that has really accelerated the conversation around indoor air. And then when you see people like Greystar put out a survey, that indoor air quality is now top three of the most demanded attribute of a
Mhm.
space on the residential side. All of these things I think have really kind of solidified in the imagination of real estate that air quality is directly actually affecting my lease up rates, my ability to attract tenants, keep tenants, etc. So I think it is one of those markers of health. It is obviously only a small facet of what is affecting health. Certainly, the location of where you're working and where you're living is also having a very large impact on overall health outcomes. But I think that the air quality piece is the newer piece of the puzzle. I think real estate obviously
Yeah.
has talked about location forever. It's very important. We actually just partnered with Aware, which is one of the sensor companies, to actually be able to take the sensor data directly into the Fitwel platform. Again, it does many things.
Yeah.
It addresses that demand piece. It also gives more clarity to the data, right? You don't have to have perfect indoor air quality. Your air quality needs to be within the band that is health promoting. So it allows folks to actually understand the data that they're looking at. And then it addresses that need for less paperwork because we can just pull in that data directly from sensors. So I think this is an exciting step forward for us because it addresses multiple different needs. So I think that's always a great thing where we're saying we need more efficiency, we need more data, and we need to respond to tenants as far as air quality is concerned.
Yeah. Yeah. I feel like in the past, well, maybe it's like it was sort of this like awareness building after COVID, and then like the technology is starting to be in a place where it can kind of catch up. But I also am seeing a lot more focus on indoor air quality and indoor air quality issues. Actually, as part of the 10-year anniversary for the toolkit, we published a separate sort of key takeaways on indoor air quality, and ULI is part of the Global Commission for Healthy Indoor Air. So access to healthy indoor air is a huge equity issue. There's many schools and other facilities with folks that are, have additional sort of risk or exposure to unhealthy indoor air conditions, so CO2 and PM. And so I think that focus on indoor air and the need for everybody to have access to indoor air, growing awareness that we spend 90% of our time indoors, and we don't have the regulatory frameworks or the sort of the systems to help protect indoor air in the same way that we have had for outdoor air quality. And so I think there's a lot of gaps there, and the real estate industry is sort of playing a role in helping to increase transparency and then to plug some of those gaps, but I think we have a long way to go still.
Yeah, no, definitely. And I think that with air quality, I think this is a global trend. So why don't we kind of shift a little bit? Both ULI and Fitwell are global. And so I think to broaden the conversation, what are we seeing as a US trend, and then what are we seeing globally? Because we
Yeah.
are, for the first time, actually, as Fitwel, we have had stronger, faster growth outside of the US for the first time since we launched Fitwel than we did in the US, which obviously we've already discussed some of the larger reasons why that is the case. But I do think it's also an optimistic trend for 2026, and that is that there is still leadership in the real estate industry around health and wellness. There is still a lot of traction. There's a lot of innovation that's happening globally. And there are still pockets that are leading in New York, and we'll obviously talk about the active design guidelines in a second because it's a big step forward for New York City. But we are seeing a lot of leadership globally. Certainly, Europe and the Middle East continues to really lead the way, both on a regulatory framework as far as the EU is concerned. But then in the Middle East, we're seeing adoption of health and wellness as a key differentiator for that region. And we've been working with Aldar now for the last couple of years. They're one of our largest customers at this point. And I think what is exciting about working in the UAE specifically is that there is real buy-in from the leadership of the UAE, where they've made a commitment. They want to have the longest life expectancy in the world. They want to have the longevity as a real focus at the countrywide level. And then that is being translated into every facet of decision making for real estate, yes, but also for investment in technology and medical investment, life science, AI, et cetera. So that kind of leadership is exciting to see globally,
Yeah.
and will result in innovation. And we can certainly talk about AI because no conversation about 2026 or 25.
No, so how did we get halfway into
I don't know.
more than halfway into the conversation without AI? Well, just to go old school for a second with
Yeah.
the sort of like global trends. I mean, I think yeah, I see some of the same things that you're seeing. I think there is and has been, leadership outside of the US, in particular on active mobility and sustainable mobility. I mean, that is just, you think about the world leading countries and you think about places like the Netherlands or Denmark. And we actually took a study tour to the Netherlands as part of our Health Leaders Network. We took a group of Health Leaders Network alumni to the Netherlands, and they spent a lot of time learning about resilience and health, in particular, how that shows up in their public transport and their transportation system and networks. And so we just published a report on sustainable mobility, and in particular, how the real estate industry and buildings can be part of a bigger sustainable mobility ecosystem. So you have the public investments like transit and bike lanes, but buildings play a role in making it easy for people to utilize those assets. So whether it's, bike storage or locker rooms or real-time transit information, if that's helpful, or bike repair stations or other things. And so we did two different workshops this year that we were very proud of, sort of highlights of the year, one in Miami and one in Manchester, also this global conversation. And so, when you think about sort of like trends for 2026, I think indoor air quality is a big one. And then increased focus on the intersection between transportation and commercial real estate and housing, and how those two pieces can mutually reinforce each other. Like how can we build housing and office that helps people be active and hook in with those transportation networks?
Great. Totally agree. And it's very exciting to see, kind of all of these cities emerging. Manchester, isn't one that probably has been part of the conversation. So
Yeah.
it's great to see new folks coming to the table and really innovating. This is a perfect segue for me to discuss active design and New York City, who obviously has been leading in really transforming New York City from a car-centric environment, which it was 15 years ago, into a people-centric city, which is what we're talking about. We're not going to cycle somewhere or walk somewhere if it isn't in cycling or walking distance and you don't have safe routes to get there. And that transformation of New York City started during the Bloomberg administration when the original active design guidelines were published 15 years ago, which is kind of shocking. And I'm delighted to say that earlier this month, just a few days ago, a new set of active design guidelines were published. So Active Design 2.0, or ADG 2.0, as it is affectionately known, has been published by New York City, and it brings a new facet into the conversation about active design. So still about how do we create cities and communities and the structures of our cities, the buildings and the infrastructure to support active transportation and active lives, but also how do we do that really focusing on equity. The original active design guidelines really didn't look at this from an equity lens, and a lot of the infrastructure improvements in New York were made to the usual suspects. So Union Square, for example, wonderful transformation, but really, like it was kind of, in the center of Manhattan and not necessarily addressing the communities that had the greatest health disparities. So really focusing on how do you innovate in cities, and New York City specifically with the active design guidelines, in areas that have the greatest health disparities. How do we really address some of the structural inequality that has been built into planning processes over the last century? Really, how do we start to address some of these issues that manifest in the built environment? Why do you have a highway going straight through a residential neighborhood, right? That was a decision that was made. How do you start to knit those communities back together again? And how do we do so in a way that is data-driven, research-driven, and really intentional? So very excited. Thank you so much to the partnership of New York City. We were part of a large group of agencies and other folks that really contributed and led the development of those active design guidelines over the last 4 years. So it's great that they're out there. We're really excited.
Yeah, I mean that's an incredible milestone. And the active design guidelines, the first version, I mean, I feel like all of these, you know, um, outputs are milestones in helping us advance our understanding of what a city should be and how do we get, what are the tools to help us get from who we are, what a community looks like today, and where we need to go. And it's just, I feel like New York is such a leader in the US. Everybody looks to New York to say like, okay, what's the cutting edge? What's the state of the art? And so to have a statement that says, these design principles are important and they matter and they help make our community and our city healthier, more equitable, better for communities, better for people, better for connection, better for business, better for economic development. All of that is just it's an incredibly important signal.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, the original motivation of active design was one of how do we as New York City compete on the global stage for talent? And so it's interesting you brought up the Netherlands, because that was one of the countries we were certainly looking at way back when and saying, okay, in order to attract talent, we need talent in order to attract investment in New York City. This is before
Yeah.
New York was a tech hub. Like, how do we attract tech industry? We need the talent to support the tech industry. What does that talent want? And what the data showed us is that talent wants quality of life. They want an environment to live in where they can sit out and have a cup of coffee, and that they can cycle to work, or they can walk to the park, or they can, exercise their dog. They want that quality of life, and they want it in New York City. So that was very much kind of instrumental in the changes, was first an economic driver, and then how do we really address some of the fundamental kind of reasons that people move to places, choose to live where they choose to live, choose to work where they choose to work. And I don't think any of that has changed. I think it's still the same conversation. How do we demonstrate that prioritizing the people that you're building for, the people that you're designing for, is actually good for business as well as obviously good for health? I think that The other thing that the active design guidelines, the new ones, are able to do, which we couldn't do with the original active design guidelines, they're now 15 years of case studies. So we can now show and tell about what has worked, what hasn't worked. There's actually an entirely new chapter within the guidelines around how to engage community to really have that kind of two-way conversation with the community and actually design for the community and prioritizing the community's input. So there's an entire new chapter now. So there's a building chapter, an urban design infrastructure chapter, and there's a community engagement chapter, which I think was definitely missing from the first. And it's exciting that has been kind of brought to the fore. So, folks, we would love your questions, and we would also love to hear now what you're seeing for 2026. We are what does this all mean for next year? Where do we think the
Mhm.
industry is going? Where do we think this particular facet of the industry, which is, the health, wellness, climate, etc., piece of real estate? Rachel, do you wanna get out your crystal ball and start to see the future? It's a tricky thing to do at the moment, but
I know. I feel like 2025 was so unpredictable in so many ways, so topsy-turvy. It's really hard to think about making predictions for 2026. But I really hope that folks will share their, I guess, what they're predicting and then also what they're excited about. Are there things that you're really looking forward to working on or initiatives that you have or things that you're seeing that feel really promising to you? Um, so I can just point out a couple things. Each year we do a global sustainability outlook, which is sort of a pulse taking that we do of ULI members in the US and North America and Europe. And we publish that in January, but I can give folks a sneak peek. So and these are a little bit more focused on sustainability issues, but a couple of the trends that the interviewees and the focus group participants noted was growing recognition of financial risks and the business case for decarbonization and for sustainability writ large. So really thinking about that bottom line piece that we've been talking about a lot, standardizing and integrating sustainability into investment models. And I think this integration piece is really important. I think we were looking at, and my team was looking at a Harvard Business Review study about which companies have really continued to continue to do the work on sustainability. And the study said that, well, first of all, the good news is that most companies that they surveyed were doing continuing to invest in sustainability, although they might not be speaking about it quite as loudly as they had been because of all the crosswinds for especially like the ESG terminology. And among those countries that have continued to plow forward, there were three factors that were most important. And one was that it had been integrated into their business processes. So things like certification or in the due diligence process for acquisitions or other things that was part and parcel for that the companies recognize the value that these approaches brought to their business. So this is, totally in line with all the things that we've been talking about today. And three, they had leadership and champions that were in leadership that saw this value and that continued to push the work forward. So integration, value, and leadership were sort of the three key things that mattered. So coming back to the sustainability outlook, integrating sustainability into investment models was seen as important and key. The third one was a shift towards whole building. So really thinking about like life cycle, whole building, not just operations, but materials and all of the other things that go into making real estate decision making. The rise of artificial intelligence, and we haven't even really talked about AI yet.
we're going to talk about it.
The rise of artificial intelligence as both a sustainability tool and a resource challenge. So, it's obviously incredibly powerful and has a lot of potential to help us sharpen decision making. It's also incredibly resource intensive, both energy and water. And I think, seeing a lot of community pushback about data center locations, and I think that that will continue to play out in 2026. And then operate the final one, the fifth one is operationalizing physical resilience in response to escalating climate impacts. So really thinking about physical climate risk and resilience and the need to address, hazards like wildfires and hail and coastal storms and that kind of thing. Um, when it comes to health in particular and healthy buildings, I'm seeing a lot of momentum around unlocking housing production. It feels like there's a lot of recognition of the need to do that at the state level and at the local level. You see a lot of regulatory shifts in California, which is really leading the way on a lot of that, thinking about what do we need to do about zoning and building codes and all of the things that hold us back, community resistance to new development, and really the need to build more infill, healthy, inclusive development. Um, so
Great.
those are the things that I'm seeing. Yeah.
That's amazing. I mean, a really amazing list. And I think that I know that everybody here obviously is interested. We would love to share that once it comes out in January, the full list with folks. That would be really fantastic.
Yeah. Yeah,
Um,
for sure.
and then I think we've been skirting around the AI thing. So let me just tell you what we see for 26, and it will actually start to talk about maybe AI or at least kind of machine learning pieces. So again, like we're hearing loud and clear from the industry, we need to do things more efficiently, right? We have to just reduce paperwork. We have to be able to use the data that we have. We have a lot of data these days, but we have to be able to do it in a way that is smart, and that we understand what that data means, because some real estate developers are telling us now they have a lot of data, but they don't have anybody who is able to analyze what it all means, basically to put all the pieces together in a way that makes, kind of makes sense of it all. So I think what we are looking at for 26 and what we're continuing, we just launched some of our efficiency features that we're calling the Wizard. And we've actually named our wizard Nova, which was a very democratic process to name the wizard. So its name is Nova. So we are really looking at what can we do. We have obviously have a tech platform. We updated the standard to V3 with the intention of a lot of this efficiency in mind, but to really reduce the amount of time that it takes for folks to get to the certification, to get to the so what, basically. So portfolio-wide strategies, for example, means that if you give us paperwork that demonstrates your indoor air quality, for example, as we've been talking about it, your indoor air quality policy or your integrated pest management policy was my favorite. You can now populate that across all of the assets that it's associated with, which just makes sense. Like, why wouldn't you be able to do that? And I think one of the things that AI that we're seeing has done somewhat is we all now have greater expectations. Like, I shouldn't be doing repetitive tasks. I want to be able to move quickly to the things that actually add value, rather than spend all of my time doing the busy work. So I think that we are certainly seeing both a demand for that. For certifications to remain relevant, we have to address AI. We have to be able to really kind of provide intelligent solutions to folks and not just, kind of tell people what they have done, but really start to inform decision making in a way that is going to drive health and value always. Of course, this is real estate we're talking about. So I'm excited about that because a lot of the preparation we did in the last couple of years with the new standard, with a new tech platform, was to be able to get to this point. And so we've started to release some of those efficiencies. And they're being well received, and we're excited. It just makes sense. It's like, nobody's saying, why did you do that? Everyone's like, do more, please. And we started with location strategies. So I think these are the two themes that are emerging: the location of buildings, how active the kind of the surroundings, or how they support active mobility, how they support active design. Kind of your location is critical, and then the indoor environment. Those are your two big pieces when it comes to health. So I think, to me, that's exciting for 26, as far as it feels, and it is progress. And I think that it's bringing AI, or there's not much AI in what we're doing. It's more machine learning because we're taking the evidence base, basically, and we're taking the actual conditions. But it is answering that need, and it is keeping us relevant as the industry moves faster. Real estate is one of the last to really embrace technology. And I think that it has the potential to actually jump ahead and embrace AI because of the amount of data that real estate has. It is actually, I think, ripe for really a lot of innovation where we start to understand the demand from people, along with those climate risk conditions, along with all of the different opportunities for what does this mean for the design of a building? What does this mean for the ongoing investment in my property? All of that kind of brought together actually is super powerful and is probably more than we as humans can do on our own. So I do think that we are in a position as an industry where this could actually lead to real innovation, really kind of unique solutions that directly address the unique needs and conditions of the places that we're building in, which is what we're hearing loud and clear globally. So we do expect globally that this demand will continue to be really strong. We see no evidence of it slowing down globally. But the other part of that demand is for unique solutions, right? One size does not fit all when it comes to real estate. So how do we, as an industry, really understand what is necessary to be successful in this context? If we just take the Middle East, for example, for me to say in a standard you need to have a green space is probably not the best advice when fresh water is super scarce and it takes a huge amount of energy to desalinate water. Does it matter to humans when it says access to nature? Does that mean access to a green garden or does it mean access to nature? And that could be nature in any form. So I do think we need to really be thinking about what are the unique opportunities and not just how do I rebuild what was successful in New York and rebuild it in another part of the world. This has always been the challenge of real estate, and I think that this is another thing that the data, the innovation, all of these things, all of these pieces can come together to ensure that we aren't just building cookie cutter buildings that aren't appropriate for the climate or the increased risk
Yeah.
associated with climate change.
Yeah. Sarah from CFAT also lifted up biodiversity.
Nice.
Um, yeah, mainstream focus on biodiversity, many diverse impacts, and increased focus on intentionally designed and maintained greenery can have on health, sustainability, and economic value creation. It's interesting, just as a side note, like when we've done these study tours in Europe, they have this approach that I think isn't quite as common here called rewilding, which is like kind of really letting landscapes go back to a much more natural and unmanicured state. It's less maintenance for, the building owners and the communities, and it has all sorts of benefits for the bees and the butterflies. And it was interesting. It's kind of a culture shift though, because it requires people to not expect to see, heavily manicured spaces and eat throughout the city and in like apartment complexes and stuff like that. But I thought it was really cool. And it just goes to show, yeah, all of these strategies need to be really rooted in what matters to community and tailored to the specific place that folks are in.
Yeah, absolutely. Definitely.
Well, I am definitely looking forward to a little bit of a holiday rest,
That's
and
right. We can, before 26, we do hopefully all get to have a little bit of time off.
I hope so too. And I really appreciate everybody staying and
Yeah,
listening and participating, and hope that folks have an opportunity to spend time with family and friends and have a joyful and safe winter holiday season.
absolutely. Yes. So thank you all for joining us. We will circulate all the resources that the team's been posting during this webinar. And actually, my end of year letter will actually follow up on a lot of these themes. And we will share that ULI publication with you all in January when it comes out. So thank you again, Rachel. Thank you so much for sharing. And you're also on the CFED board. So thank you so much for your continued participation in
My
everything
honor.
you do. All right. Well, thank you. And thank you, team. All right. Bye, everybody.